trick-or-treating, dressing up in costumes, and going to haunted houses. These are all things we do during Halloween. But one thing that does not stick to the Halloween schedule is horror movies. Movies that are supposed to scare and fascinate an audience who have a taste for the supernatural. But where did these movies get their start? Where are we now in the horror genre? What's up, fellow horror film fanatics? My name is Ryan Shaber, and this is 5 Minute Flashback. We will be looking back through the decades of scary movies and seeing how it has changed since its humble start. The first horror movie can date back to the late 1800s. The first movie was said to be created by French filmmaker Georges Méliès. The film was called The Haunted Castle in the United States and was released in 1896. The movie featured a haunted house with many monsters. However, the intent of the film was not to scare, but to amuse the audience. It is still considered the first horror movie. With the release of The Haunted Castle, it opened up the floodgates to the supernatural film franchises. Filmmakers went back and read horror literature and started to bring those scary stories to life. The early 1900s started to bring life to monsters such as Frankenstein's monster, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Nosferatu. These movies are most known for their magnificent lighting and editing techniques. The 30s, 40s, and 50s are known as the golden age of horror films. We see the creation of famous stories like Dracula and the Wolfman. Movies like these are made by Universal, who continue to remake and reboot these famous monster movies. 1957 was an amazing year in horror history when color was introduced into the industry. The first accredited horror movie to use color is The Curse of Frankenstein. This was another step to the future for this genre and opened up many possibilities for directors to scare their fans. The 1960s through the 80s are probably the host of some of the most memorable horror movies ever made. The 60s brought Little Shop of Horrors and Night of the Living Dead to the big screen, and we started to see variations of original ideas being shown to the public. The 1970s gave us some blockbuster films such as Jaws, Halloween, and Alien. These movies were international hits and are considered some of the greatest movies ever made, not just in the horror genre, but as cinematic masterpieces. With horror movies starting to captivate the masses, they are now being seen as dependable pieces of entertainment and not films made for a niche group of people. With killer soundtracks and horrifying monsters, the 80s brought a new life to the scene. Monsters like Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason from Friday the 13th showed raw power in slasher films. Gore and teenagers lost in the night was the name of the game in the 80s, and some movies surpassed even the most creative imaginations. The 1990s and early 2000s continued the reign of slasher films and gory wonders to the silver screen. Some of the biggest films in these decades were Jurassic Park and Saw. Saw brought a creative storyline throughout many movies that many have not seen before. It seemed that the stories were starting to feel the same, and audiences were losing interest, except for the die-hard fans. However, the 2010s and on started to bring a new light to horror. Movies had messages behind them to discuss political and social issues. Most notably, the movie Get Out by Jordan Peele started many conversations about civil rights, but he tied it in with a mesmerizing story with great horror techniques. Along with movies like Get Out, we are starting to see diversity more and more in the horror genre. Now that we have gone over a quick summary of horror throughout the decades, we can look at some of the controversies and knockbacks of this particular genre. First, the biggest issue now with horror movies are remakes and reboots. We are now starting to see the same story over and over again with a slightly adapted title or a setting more fitting for the times. We have new Halloween movies, a prequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and a reboot of the It miniseries from the 90s. Some of these reboots have been great, but original ideas like that from Jordan Peele and Ari Aster have really defined the last couple years of films. The genre of horror films is forever changing. Whether it's gore, jump scares, or challenging your mental thoughts, horror filmmakers will keep adapting their techniques to captivate their viewers. Do you have a favorite horror movie? Leave a comment down below, suggesting some great scary movies that you love. Remember to subscribe to ZTV 5 Minute Flashback on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and show us some love on Instagram. Thanks for watching, my fellow horror fanatics. This is Ryan Shaber reminding you to go out, enjoy life, and stay curious.
This program was produced by ZTV at the University of Akron. Do you want to gain experience in video production, professional social media, or working with real clients? Visit the UA School of Communications online or follow us on social media to learn more. ZTV, make media, make a difference.